All right, so we are now on to chapter 2 of your book, Introduction to Policing. We're going to go over a brief history of police in the United States. Obviously, we haven't been a country very long, only several hundred years, not several thousand. And when you really look back into the history of policing, there's not a huge ton of it. We do, thousands of years ago, we did pretty much handle our stuff on our own. It wasn't until that kind of got out of control that the heads of the state or the heads of countries or kings would kind of take it over. But it was very different than what it is today. So let's get into some of the important things. All right, so our history from the United States, American policing comes from England. And down here you can see what are called bobbies. And we'll get into that in a minute. But those hats give bobbies away. Okay, English settlers, about 90% of them, came to America and they brought a night watch system. This pretty much meant that, as you see down here in green, so that's important, citizens resolved their own disputes. It wasn't 911, call a cop, get a cop. And most of the crime occurred at night, and it was only really violent crime that the police were around to stop. By the 1800s, with the rapid growth of cities, um, crime, mob violence, they've become so much problem that we knew we had to kind of change just being a night watch. And so in England, Sir Robert Peel, who was the Home Secretary in London, was really at the forefront. I mean, we're talking in the 1800s. He thought, police should be organized along military lines. They should be men of quiet demeanor and good appearance. They should walk prescribed beats. It was really cool. When I went over to London with Dr. Burke as part of the class she teaches, which is study abroad, we got to see a statue of Sir Robert Peel. So just a very important and influential man when it came to policing. That's a picture of him. And as I put down here in the green, yes, there's again those hats. Sir Robert Peel used to call the police bobbies. And so that's something you want to remember. So very interesting. All right. So in the 1870s, Pill's strategy spread to every city in America, and all of a sudden we didn't have just night watch systems, we had day watch systems. And so by the 1850s, we pretty much had police officers working 24 hours, especially in most of your major cities. By the middle of the 19th century, we had a watch and ward systems that began to be replaced by centralized police agencies. So they were large forces of uniformed polices that walked regular beats. They could arrest people. In the 1850s, they began to carry revolvers, and we had both municipal, which is city, like Ashland, police, and county, like Jackson County Sheriff's Department. We also had the development of state and federal agencies. So the FBI, and you want to know this, was established on July 26th of 1908. Okay, in the mid-19th century and the early 20th century, we started having technology. 1903, the first motor patrol was established in Boston, and in 1920s, news of crime broadcast over the airwaves started as well, to both the public and to the police and squad cars. In 1930, St. Louis installed its own transmitting station. All right, the eras. You really need to understand there's four major eras in policing. The first is the political era, which was from the 1830s to the 1900s, and you do need to know the four of them. And this is why it was called the political era. There was a lot of corruption. You had the mafia, you had people paying off politicians and police sheriffs and chiefs, just a ton of political corruption during this time. The next era, the second era, is called the Reform era. We knew that the political era wasn't good, so starting in the 1900s to the 1960s, we wanted to destroy the power of the political bosses. And the Wickersham Commission report, which showed all the things that police officers were doing wrong, came out, and it just was an area that we wanted to change and reform. during the Reform era, if you need to know two people in the history of policing, the first is Sir Robert Peel from England and how he called police bobbies and all of his forefront thinking. And the second was August Vollmer. That's a picture of him down on the right. He was the chief of police in Berkeley, California, which you want to know that. You also want to remember that he is considered the father of American police professionalism. So whereas Sir Robert Peel is from England, August Vollmer had a lot of the same forefront thinking for police in America. Okay, continuing on the Reform era, this was really the most challenging era in American policing. Our crime rate doubled. The civil rights movement began. The anti-war sentiment and riots were going on. It was really a tough time and very challenging. And so CALEA, which is accreditation for police departments, was established in 1979. It's a thing that police departments do have to pay to be a part of, and it can be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year because you have to make sure you have certain policies and procedures and you meet certain levels of policing. All right, our third era is the community policing or problem solving era. This was kind of the era that I stepped into policing from the 1980 to early 2000. That's where we said, you know what? We can't go into a community that's been decaying for decades and decades and just fix it when the cops show up because they're called. We need the community to take part and help us solve. We needed public cooperation. It was also the start of problem-oriented policing. So you'll hear community-oriented policing, which means the community assists, and you have problem-oriented policing, where you take the problem and you take a holistic approach for each specific problem to solve the crimes per what's going on. All right, I don't have it written up, but the fourth era, which really just started after 9/11, is considered what we would call the Homeland Security era after terrorism. So, and I got to tell you, I was a part of that, and it really was a new era of policing because things really changed after the bombing of 9/11. But there's not a whole lot written on it. It's kind of the new era of policing. Even this textbook doesn't cover it. All right, current issues in policing. You have recruitment, selection, accountability, exercise of discretion, police misconduct, ethical decision making, police officers being honest. So those are just some current things that we're going to be moving forward. I'll see you on the next video over chapter 3.